guys ඔන්න අපි ආවා මේ oyster farm එකක් බලන්න. මේ තියෙන මෙතන මේ shop එකකට එක්කම oyster farm එක. දැන් මම book කරලා තියෙනවා tour එකක් හවස 1ට. දැන් වෙලාව 12:50යි. තරමට 10කින් පටන් ගන්නේ. ගිහලා බලමු මොකද්ද මේ oyster farm එකේ කරන්න කියලා. මෙතන තියෙනවා ගහලා. oyster bait tours book online. උදේ 10ට හවස 1ට තමයි tour එක පටන් ගන්න. ඉතින් ටිකක් ඉන්නවා මෙතන. මේ ඔක්කොම tour යන අය මම හිතන්නේ ඉන්නේ. එකේ tour එකට නිකන් ඉන්නවා. ඉතින් මේ farm එකේ නම තමයි Freycinet Marine farm කියන එක. මේක බෙදන්නේ වැඩි කට්ටිය නෑ කට්ටිය කොහොමද 10ක් විතර තමයි ඉන්නේ. තව දෙන්නෙක් යනකම් ඉන්නවා ඊට පස්සේ අපි යන්න පටන් ගන්නවා කියලා කිව්වා.
Well, we'll see if the other two turn up.
Yeah.
We'll make a start. So if you'd like to jump in, it's only a short 5-minute drive, so we won't be cooped up for too long. Yeah. The shop is actually twice the size of what it used to be, and everything inside the kitchen is brand new. So the cooktops, the benches, the taps, the fridges, the dishwasher, you name it, everything was brand new. The undercover seating area is also twice the size of what it used to be, with a new roof. The staff have a staff room now, and the toilets have had a major upgrade as well, being that we can now flush them, which is a huge improvement from what we had. And the owners had to do all these expansions to be able to cope with the numbers of tourists that were coming through. They always have to be sitting down. They always arrive at quantity. But I'm going to tuck up here, because up here is where this is what we're going to be wearing. These are pretty straightforward. They go by your shoe size. So you'll actually take your shoes off and leave your socks on for comfort. And if you're wearing longer pants or jeans, it might pay to try and tuck your pants into your socks. That way they don't crunch up around your knees once you slide them off. But I suggest 1 foot at a time. And then once you get your feet in, you do the waiter wiggle, you pull them up as high as they will go. And then it's up over your shoulders like a big pair of overalls. And then we're ready to go.
මේ ඇඳුමේ පොකට්ටයක් තියෙනවා ගන්න පුළුවන් මේ ෆෝන් එකක් එහෙම වතුරට බහින්න තියෙන නැතනේ නැතනේ වතුරට බහින්න තියෙන්නේ යනකම් මම කියන්නම් මේ ඔයිස්ටර් එකේ කිව්වා ෆාම් මේ රෙස්ටෝරන්ට් එකේ ස්ටෝර් එක ගැන ඒගොල්ලන් දවසකට සමහර විශ්වවිද්‍යාලවලට 12 පැකට් 300ක් විතර විකුණනවා දවසක් තියෙනවා. තව කිව්වා මේගොල්ලන් මේ ෆාම් එක ඇතුලේ ඔයිස්ටර්ස් 50000ක් විතර ප්‍රමාණයක් ඇක්සෙප්ට් කරනවා.
There's actually some wooden posts sticking out of the water, but they're behind those green bushes, but that's also our farm. restaurants just prefer to sell the, yeah, you can just hand it behind you there, the smaller ones. But commercially speaking, the reason why we don't see these very often is because the oysters you'll eat today are of a premium grade. So if we were selling our oysters to, say, the Sydney Fish Market, we could sell them for about $10.50 a dozen, and every 2 years. And for an extra 8 to 10 years, we're selling these for $17.50 a dozen. So we're much better to grow the small ones and sell them off quickly. However, if you do see them in restaurants, typically they're served as 1 or 2, not a dozen, and often they're served cooked. And when you cook them, they do shrink in size, and then they're a lot easier to eat. But when that water does warm up and peak, the oysters will open and they spawn, releasing all the eggs and sperm into the water. That's what we call a broadcast breeder, because essentially they can't meet one another, so they just open up and hope for the best. But they're also chain reaction spawners too, which means we could have 1 million oysters here, and if one spawns, they will all spawn. So it's a chain reaction. And the sperm and eggs are floating around, they find each other, and they create a larvae. And that larvae will swim around for about 6 weeks before latching on to a stump or a rock or anything solid in an intertidal zone. And why that's important is that if my hand's an oyster, when it's a high tide, the oysters are underwater and they're open and they're eating. What they eat is literally anything that will fit into their mouth. So it's kind of like being on a holiday in Tasmania. You just eat whatever fits. And then when it's a low tide, the oysters are out of the water, so they're shut, but they're getting the UV from the sun. And that's what makes that shell nice and hard. But more importantly, that action of opening and closing is strengthening their main muscle, called the abductor muscle, which is the white hard bit on the inside. And it's really important for us to have a strong abductor muscle so that when we take our oysters up to the shop, we put them into the fridge and they can survive up to 11 days out of water pretty happily. Now, how we buy our baby oysters, we actually buy them from a nursery / a hatchery. Tasmania has the biggest hatcheries in Australia. They pick 20 to 30 of the best looking oysters they can find, purely based on good looks. So the shape of the shell, the colour of the shell, how wide, how long, and how deep that shell goes, those sorts of things. Put them into a big tank of water. You increase that water temperature by 5 degrees every couple of weeks. The oysters think a full year has gone past, so they spawn into that tank, creating up that larvae. 6 weeks later, we throw in some crushed up shell. Usually it's crushed up scallop shell, because it's a nice flat surface. That larvae will swim along, latch onto that piece of shell, and create a baby oyster, which is called a spat. But it should be noted that it's not forming around a piece of shell, it's just forming against it, like it would to something in the wild. Because an oyster doesn't need to be attached to anything to actually grow and to get bigger, but it does need somewhere to start, because it can't create that shell just floating around in limbo. So once that initial shell is formed, you stir up all those broken scallop shells, all your baby oysters will fall off, and then you sieve them out and sell them off to all the various farms. And those 20 to 30 adult oysters will produce about 250 million babies. Keeping in mind the average oyster on your dinner plate is about 2 years old, so these are about 2 months old, basing it off that average growth rate. If I just find a few here, and I'll hand them out, you can have a closer look. So there we go. There you go. I'll share between two. So there you go. You can pass these around and have a closer look.
Thank you.
There we go. There we go. Let's look at that one.
Oh my gosh.
Centimeter ekkodne.
Yeah, around about. So that is a fully formed oyster, just like you'd buy in the restaurant, but of course tiny. And you'd be a bit annoyed if a dozen of those came in. Fascinated, I'm sure, but annoyed. And if we fast forward to a year and a half, we have something that looks like this coming out of the water, which is looking a bit more delicious. You can see them all in here. And even at a quick glance, you can see that there's lots of different sizes in there, yet they're all the same age. And when they go through the grader this time, well, for one, they go through a mechanical grader. We don't do these by hand. And we very simply have a small, medium, and large size. Depending on where they fall out, depends on where they go. So this here is what we call a module, and essentially it is 6 of those containers, which are called seepers that we were looking at, held together by this plastic coated wire. And you won't see this design anywhere else in the world, and if you do, it actually came from this farm first. And the owners of the farm came up with this design so we could be more efficient in moving our stock around the farm. What happens is those oysters are almost restaurant size. They get filled up about a quarter full all the way along. We load them up to the bigger boat that you see on the shore there, take them out to the offshore lease.
Try kandanne.
You're really struggling there.
Fresh.
But I should say, these you might find them to be a bit saltier than normal because they're obviously fresh out of the river. But I don't know what
කියන තැන ගොඩ salty. ඒවට fresh. නියම. මේ මීට වඩා fresh එකක් වෙන ගලේ මොකද දෙන්නත් දෙන්න. Keep it going. Thank you.
So, we're just going to scrape down the side of our shell. Nothing too complicated. And I'll expose this white line. Actually, I'll just make it a bit more bold for the sake of the demo. You see this bold white line along here. And that is telling me where the top shell meets the bottom shell. So that's where I'm going to be sticking my knife in. You see this white line? See this white line along here? This white line. So I'm going to come about halfway down and stick it just above that white line. Because if you go below the white line, it's like trying to stick your knife through a brick wall. So you'll always want to go just above where that white line is, like so. See that there? Just above it. And at this stage, a lot of people get really excited. Sorry, before that, I was going to say, I'm going to hold it at a 45-degree angle. And then I was going to say is that people get really excited and they really start to screwdriver their knife in, which is fine, but you'll chip a lot of shell into your oyster. So we're actually much better to go side to side, like this. I will admit, a little bit of twisting in the beginning does help to get the tip of your knife in. And then once you're in, side to side should be the way to go. So, applying a bit of pressure, coming in at this angle, a little bit of twisting, I'm always nervous that I'm going to stab myself on the demonstration part. I'll do it 1,000 times a day, but of course the demo one's the one I'm going to stab myself on. So, a little bit of twisting, just to get the tip of my knife in, like so. And now we're going to move side to side while I flatten it out, so I come across the top of the oyster. So we're just going to go side to side while I'm flattening it out, like so. And it should be noted that I'm not even trying to open the oyster yet. I'm just getting my knife in. So we're going to keep going side to side till I'm halfway in. So the knife is only about halfway in. So again, just going side to side. I'm not doing big actions, just wiggling it in, pushing it side to side till I'm halfway in. And now I'm going to open the oyster. But again, a lot of people get excited and they really start working their knife and they bring it around here and back, twist it up and down. And they turn the oyster into a real soup. So all we have to do is, if my pinky is the knife, we're simply just going to go forwards and back. And we've cut through that muscle and the oyster will pop open. So I'll try and do it so you can all see, but I'm simply going to go nice forward and back. And he's opened up. Now, of course, it's still pretty closed, so instead of trying to fight yourself to open it, you can bring your knife towards the back of the hinge, like so. Nothing technical there, my knife's just sitting at the back. You can see that knife's just sitting at the back of the hinge there. And what we're going to do is give our knife a twist to help pick up that shell. And it's like turning a key, basically. So it's a little half turn towards you, like so. If I hold it open with my thumb, you will notice that he's still stuck to the top of the shell. And that's really just moisture holding that there. However, if I was to rip that off quickly, it would most likely come with it, and then you lose that part of the oyster. So before we rip that lid off, with our knife we can just break that moisture seal by scraping it down like so. And then we take that off, and we haven't lost any oyster on our top shell, nice and neat. Now if you do have any little bits of shell in there or bits of seaweed or mud, I've actually poured the water out already on this one, but you'd have some water on the inside. You can actually use that water to help you flush anything out that you might have got in there. So what you'd do is you'll just feed it in and then let it drain out with the water. But like I said, I already tipped mine out by accident. But the final stage of shucking an oyster, which isn't necessary, but it looks good in front of your friends and family, is cutting them off and flipping them over. So using the edge of our knife here, not the tip, just the edge, where this muscle is, I'm going to slide underneath, so I'm hard up against that muscle. You can see that, I'm hard up against this muscle with the edge of my knife. You can see that there? So you can see here, I'm actually going to slide it underneath the oyster, hard up against that muscle in there. You can see that there? Hard up against that muscle. You can see here, here's the muscle here, so I'm sliding it in. And what we're going to do is push down through that muscle. And in fact, it's like a really hard scrape. So we're scraping down through that muscle. So I'll try and do it so you can all see again, but it's just a nice firm push down, like so. So it goes through. The oyster's still held in place with moisture. Get that shell out. So, here we go. So the oyster's still held in place with moisture, so we can run our knife around the outside to loosen them up so he's ready to fall out. And of course, you can go ahead and eat him, or we're going to flip him over. And there's two common ways, but there's no wrong way. Personally, using the flat of my blade, I usually go on the outside and push down and scoop it underneath that oyster. Or you can slide your knife under the mussel and then flip it away from you. But there's no wrong way of doing it. So I'm going to push down under here and flip it over. And then that's what we're used to seeing. Hang on, let me fix it. But that's what we're used to seeing in a restaurant.
Get rid of the juice. Some juice.
Yeah, I mean, they're already salty enough as it is, and that water keeps coming back. You could almost empty them 3 times, to be honest. So.
Yum. Got a low shelf.
Oh yeah, that's just.
You got a low shelf.
No, it's just the water's drained out. So.
Oh well.
දෙවනි එක බලන්න නඩයක්වත් කියලා.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's alright, mate.
It was 50-50 chance.
Well, that's the thing when you have a name that's
Yeah.
both as well.
Thank you, Jack. Just coming up favour.
Sorry?
Just coming up favour.
8 months.
Like a bees.
Alright. දැන් ඉතින් කන්න දෙන්න.
Moving back up to that. Separate
Oh, I got it.
the seal.
ටිකක් දාගන්න එක. මම ආය කාරකට ආවා. ඉතින් හොඳ එක්ස්පීරියන්ස් එකක් ගත්තා. පළවෙනි වතාවට ඔයිස්ටර් ෆාම් එකට ගිහලා ඔයිස්ටර් ඕපන් කරේත් පළවෙනි වතාවට ස්කිල් එකක් ඉගෙන ගත්තාද. ඉතින් ඔයිස්ටර්ත් හොඳට කෑවා. ඊට පස්සේ මසල්ස් වගේකුත් කෑවා. හොඳටම බඩ පිරලා ඉන්නේ. දැන් ආයම් ඩ්‍රයිව් කරන්න තියෙනවා පැය කමාරක් ට්‍රැබුනා කියන සිටි එකට. ඉතින් ඒකෙන් තමයි මම හෙට ටුවර් එක යන්නේ. මේ මරි අයිලන්ඩ් එක බලන්න තමයි හෙට යන්නේ. ඉතින් අද හවසට ඉතින් ගිහලා අපි මම ඉන්නවා මේ කරවන් පාක් එක කොටේජ් එක බුක් කරලා තියෙනවා. ඉතින් ඒකේ තමයි අද ඉන්නේ. එත පොඩි රෙස්ට් එකක් අරගෙන හෙට අපි මරි අයිලන්ඩ් බලන්න යමු.